Everybody. I've just started the recording, so everybody knows how that works. This will be recorded and then eventually coded and put on YouTube for the other guests and DPEs to watch at their leisure. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for showing up today. Some of the items we're going to cover today, I know we didn't have a meeting in August, but if there'll be anything that people want to bring up from the July meeting, we'll talk about that. DMS issues. This is one that we're going to talk about. That's basically the main topic of today is the concept of having maintenance logs of originals versus copies and how many logs and so on and so forth we need. And I see that Ernie's on there, so he'll probably assist me in a little bit of that. Cross-country requirements is one that started showing up, and we'll talk about that. And this one here, comments DPs on restrictions given to them by the instructors of the flight schools as to what they can and can't do on a flight test. That popped up here a couple of weeks ago, so we're going to talk about that one. And the DPEAG document is going to be brought up again, point of contact reports, and how to designate the aircraft on IACRA to keep a problem from arising when there's a change of aircraft, and then talking about varying malfunctions. So first of all, any comments from the last meeting? Okay. Any DMS issues? That's all working out okay. Okay, I brought this up back in July, I think it was, and we were kind of going to just disregard the concept of the viewing of this, but after speaking with Craig Tompkins regarding this, he spoke to, I think, some of the authors regarding this. And even though it wasn't really run through a normal vetting program, they did ask that we take a look at this as DPEs and give them any input that we have into what they had written there. So Craig and I hadn't talked about how to get that information to them, but you can either send the information to me or Craig, I think. Craig, you're on, right?
Yes, Phil, I'm
Yeah,
on.
okay.
I think if anybody does have any comments, if they could maybe send it all to Phil, and Phil, if you could just batch the whole thing over to me, assuming there's anything.
I'll do that. I'll do that.
Perfect,
For those who haven't read it, I know some of you have, it's an interesting document. It's what they're looking for us down the future here, and duties and conduct of ourselves as professionals, and anything incorporating what they've already got the code of conduct written for pilots, flight instructors, so on and so forth. So they added this one to the group, but even though it's not physically out there yet, if anybody needs to link to it, let me know. But it should be in your email from the July meeting. I put the link on there so you can get it that way.
I just put it in the chat as well.
Thanks. Okay. Thanks. Whoops. Okay. I got to remember which things to click on here. Anyway, this was, like I said, put on the FAA website a few weeks ago. It's not associated with our group or the Scottsdale FSDO. They were kind of quasi blindsided by it as we were with this, but the authors are requesting any input from the DMEs. Okay, maintenance logs accessibility. So I know that we all have experienced some of these issues with, do we have copies, or can we look at copies, or can we look at originals? And then there are some places that have a status sheet on the front of the airplane's logbook or whatever that shows when things are due. So my discussion with Ernie a couple days ago, and Jeff. Jeff, are you on, Larson? No. Okay. So Ernie, you're here, right?
Yeah, I'm here. You want me to talk about this for a little bit?
Yeah. Yes, go right ahead.
All right. So I have the rules up here that talk about. I had them up here. Where'd they go? There. I have the rules up here that talk about maintenance records and copies versus originals. So I can't find any place in here where it says that you can't copy maintenance records, but that's a pretty slippery slope because there is a place in here that says if you copy them with the intent of being doing something fraudulent, and that that could lead to problems. So, you know, like I said, I can't find anything that says you can't copy them or can't accept a copy, but I think it's up to you how you want to do that. It does say in 91 that maintenance records will be available for review by the administrator or authorized persons. So again, I think it's up to you if you want to accept them. I personally would not, unless there was a really good excuse, like, you know, we keep maintenance logs in Kansas City where we do our maintenance. I don't know.
Okay, well, on the DPE side of it, thanks for that, Ernie, because we were looking at that before. We have Ernie is referring to the maintenance logs in being presented to the administrator or anyone else, which kind of plays into us. However, my discussion with Jeff Larson last week regarding this stuff, we had a situation where I think an examiner wanted copies going back. I mean, wanted to see the logs going back quite a ways. So I just want to cover what you guys really need to see on the for the purposes of the check rights. We decided that the originals were what should be required for the examiner to see. The examiner should at least have access to the originals if the applicant takes pictures. Like I know some schools, they put them on their iPads, they go into the log room, take the pictures of them, and then show them to the examiner for the purposes of the airworthiness portion of the test. So we talked about that, said that would be okay as long as the examiner had access to the originals and was able to verify that, you know, the originals were just that. Now, in regards to what you need, I know that it's concerning for the schools and the aircraft owners when their logbooks leave their house or leave their hangar or leave their possession to be concerned about the loss of them. One of the things that I did when I had my school, even years back, the examiners are not required to see the originals from the day the aircraft was born. In many cases, given the age of a lot of these airplanes, those probably don't even exist sometimes. And really the only fact of that is that it may affect the value of the aircraft, but it doesn't affect the airworthiness of the aircraft. So what we're looking for, what we should be looking for, is the latest of anything that would make it legal. So the latest annual inspection for those airplanes done that way, the latest of the 4 cycles. If it's a progressive, you should see the latest 4 cycles. So you've seen a complete cycle in a progressive. So if they just finished 3, you should see all the way back to where 3 was previous to that. So you got to see all 4 of them. Anything concerning the inspections that are required, a transponder certification, pedostatic certification, and normally ELT information is going to be on the annual inspection most of the time. I just want to bring up that, you know, the batteries and the ELT and the inspection have nothing to do with each other. It's actually 91207 Charlie and 91207 Delta. They're 2 separate regulations. But anytime the batteries are changed, basically the inspection has to be done again, or the test has to be done again. It's no big deal. The mechanic just takes his hand and bangs on it and notices that, and he notes that it transmitted on 21.5 for a couple seconds and just a few sweeps, and it was done in the first 5 minutes of the hour. So what you're looking for is the latest inspection/test and a battery due date, and some form of ADs or a compliance record where whatever was a recurring AD on that, or maybe a one-time AD, that you had a record of some type that those ADs were complied with. But we do not need to see anything beyond that. Now, the latest 100-hour won't work because it's the aircraft and a 100-hour inspection program still needs an annual inspection. So you would have to go back to the annual. So for those of our guests here that may be working with flight schools, what we did was we just took the latest inspections that were required to determine its airworthiness. And that was the log. We put that in a much smaller logbook, much smaller 3-ring binder or pouch that went with the student to the check ride, where the examiner could see the latest and greatest of what was required. That way, if anything did get lost, it was only those last couple entries. So I was never a big fan of a whole packet of books going with an applicant anyway. Plus, given the fact that we still, I don't think, are showing these students the logbooks as often as we should be in training prior to their check rides, it actually makes it easier for them to find what they need when there's only a small handful of pages or endorsements to go through. So we don't have to have every single logbook from when the airplane was born, just whatever we need to prove its airworthiness, i.e. a complete list of the cycles if it's on a progressive, or the latest annual, and there may be 100 hours or so on done since then. And then of course a transponder certification, if and of course in our area that's necessary, and pedostatic if that's required. Does anybody have any questions?
To talk about, Phil, if I could.
Yep.
So just building on what Phil said, if you go to 91-417, there's actually a list of the records that must be current and how long you have to maintain a record for. So that's under 91-417, A1, A2, and B. And it tells you specifically that the records of maintenance, preventive maintenance, alteration, records of 100-hour annual progressive or other required or approved inspections is appropriate for each aircraft, including the airframe, engine, propeller, rotor, and appliance of an aircraft. And it says how it has to be signed off. And then it talks about records have to contain total time of service, et cetera, et cetera. Then you get down here to B, and it says the owner operator shall retain the following records for the periods prescribed. So records specified in paragraph A1 are retained until the work is repeated or superseded, or for a year after the work is performed. So the important part of that is that even if the owner operator, and I know that most owners try to keep the records going all the way back to the birth of the airplane when possible, but I've set up a lot of maintenance records. When you go in and you're pulling serviceability tags out of a satchel that are 30 years old, 40 years old, that really is not beneficial to the record keeper, and you can actually get rid of it. So 1 year for this stuff that gets repeated, you have to maintain the records for 91-411, 413. Records specified in paragraph A2 will be retained and transferred with the aircraft at the time the aircraft is sold. And A2 are the records containing this information about engine, airframe, propeller, rotors, status of life-funded parts, time since last overhaul, current inspection status of the aircraft, current inspection or current status of ADs and safety directives, and copies of forms prescribed by 43.9. And then the last one is a list of defects furnished to a registered owner or operator under 43.11 of this chapter. And those defects are if you take your airplane to a mechanic, to an IA, and choose not to let the IA repair it, they're going to sign your airplane off as unairworthy and provide you with a list of the discrepancies. They're required to maintain that as well until the aircraft returns to service. So just remember that when you're going to look at records, you're really looking for the stuff, like Phil said, that's most current, and that's going to demonstrate that the aircraft is indeed airworthy.
So what do you do in the case where maybe the logbooks were stolen? And that happens occasionally with balloons. Like coming up in a couple of weeks is the big Albuquerque balloon fiesta. And
Right,
people
so-
are in hotel rooms, and I've known people that have had their pilot logbooks and their aircraft logbooks just stolen because when somebody was cleaning the room, left the door open, they reached in, grabbed a bag and left. and now they no longer have their logbooks.
43.9 talks about how to reconstruct your records.
Okay,
So in the event, if you have, I've actually done this 2 or 3 different times where I've rebuilt records, and the hardest part is getting the initial birth certificate stuff from the manufacturer. But a lot of times they'll do that for you. It'll cost you, but they'll do it. So that way and then you can also get your records from the FAA, and you can help that rebuild. And then you can guesstimate how many hours there are if you don't have something firm. You can guesstimate how many hours there is on the aircraft. And then you have to demonstrate that all of the airworthiness directives have been done, and you're going to sign off those directives as complied with, and how and who. And then you take the whole kit, you take the whole kit and caboodle. Once you've got it built, you take it to notary public, and you have them autograph it, and then the FAA will accept it.
and in the case where the manufacturer is no longer in business, the original.
Same thing. You're basically what you're doing is you're doing your due diligence. You're doing your best to try and get information you can to show this aircraft is airworthy. Now,
Okay,
you are going to have to do a new annual or a new condition inspection or any of that kind of stuff. That's all going to have to be done. And any ADs that you can't prove have been complied with, you're going to have to redo.
okay, thanks. Like I said, all this stuff happens in baloney.
Yeah, it happens.
It happens in aircraft.
Actually, in Rotary Week too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've rebuilt quite a few records when I was in industry.
Yeah, so, and thanks, Ernie. It would be behoove us to, if we aren't that familiar with 417, it says, Ernie read off to you, that if you should have any issues with a, you usually don't have a problem with the schools, but any of the owners that are concerned about that, letting them know what you're required to look at to determine airworthiness of the aircraft. Also, if you did make those copies, send your books out with just the minimum that's required. And for some reason, those got lost, like Ernie said. What we did was we took pictures of the pages that left with the applicants. So we still had copies of them. This is long before thumb drives and all that existed, and scanning, but we still had copies of those so that we could reconstruct those logs that were lost on that check ride if that happened. So, and like I said, we're only talking about a couple pages, but I just want to emphasize that the examiners do not have to see a big pile of books. They're only required to go back to determine, what is the latest annual, what's the latest transponder cert, and any of the required items for the airworthiness of the aircraft. Anything else regarding that? Have anybody have any questions regarding the logs? One other thing that you want to do, this just popped up. Actually, it happened to me and Joe Sotilli a couple years back. Joe caught it, I didn't. Was even though you see a white card, registration card in the aircraft, while that card was valid at the time that it was issued to that particular owner, came across an airplane, a couple of them, where they were sold and there was a different owner of the aircraft. But since the date on the white card in the airplane did not show it had expired yet, there was no recognition of the new owner. So it'd be a good idea if you guys just go to fa.gov aircraft registry when you find out the N number of the aircraft you're using, and just take a look at the registration with the FAA and see who actually owns the airplane. It's not done intentionally sometimes, but sometimes people will sell the airplane, and for some reason they just don't want to get rid of that white card. To leave it in there until their own permanent one shows up. There should be a pink copy in there, but sometimes it doesn't happen. So just another thing for you guys to check is to make sure that you actually do have a valid registration, because they can be sold inside that 3 years, and that card is still left in the airplane, and the one that you see or the applicant is showing you may not actually be the most current one. Any further questions on this topic?
I have a comment, I guess, on the registration. This is Wesley. How's it going?
Yes, it is.
And so I get, everybody always answers that the registration is valid for 3 years. When, you know, it's the 36 calendar months, but I've also seen some registrations where if it hasn't changed ownership, you know, some of the aero that they've just owned for years and years, it looks like that registration certificate has been valid for like 15 years, something like that.
You want me to explain that?
Yeah, because
Yeah, okay. It's been
a while since
That's a very, very good point, and shame on me for not mentioning that, because I cover that in my airworthiness ground schools. Because my 182 was purchased in 2010, October of 2010. And I recently got my latest registration, I think about a year ago. So the 2 dates you see on my registration, the first one says October 31st, 2010. And the one that you see right now is due in, I think, 2023, October 1st, 2023. So it appears that my registration is good for 13 years. That first date you see is the date that it was issued to that particular owner. Do you understand? So even though, yes, they are good for 3 years, and the way it's actually written, it's the one time the feds don't use calendar months. They actually write in their part 47.40, I think it is, says it's good for 3 years and valid to the end of the 36th month. So they don't
Right.
say 36 calendar months. But when you look at the registrations, if you see a date that does exceed 3 years, and you will on most of the airplanes, because a lot of these people have had these things for years, especially the flight schools. So what you're seeing there, Wesley, is you're seeing the date that aircraft was registered to that owner as the first date.
Yeah, the initial.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. It's been a while since, and that was what I was looking for, was a refresher.
Well, actually, no, that's a very good question, and it's come up before. And I covered in my, when I go through the documents, I cover that in there, and I use mine as an example because it appears that my registration is good for 13 years, but it's not. They're still good for only 3 years. Did everybody get that one? Okay. Did that answer your question, Wesley?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I was just, like I said, just a little refresher on that one. Appreciate it.
No problem. It actually comes up with it's come up with a few individuals who said, I don't understand why this registration has been around for 8 years. I thought it was only good for, but once again, it starts whatever day that particular owner bought the airplane. So if somebody else bought the airplane, like today, what's it, September 14th, it would say September 30th, 2021 for the first date, and then September 30th, 2024 for the expiration date. Got it? We have any other questions regarding the maintenance logs? One of the other things that may want to take a look at, Ernie mentioned this, part 43, basically 5, 7, 9, and 11, regarding what Ernie was just talking about. Plus, when it comes under preventive maintenance, when you're talking about preventive maintenance to your applicants, those are important sections, because, which is why part 43 is listed in the reference section of how do they write up and sign off and return to service an aircraft that they change the tire on or change seatbelts on or whatever. So it's kind of obviously not something you would maybe go on sat on, but it'd be a good briefing on them if they didn't know. They knew what they could do preventive maintenance, which they're more than welcome to look up. I don't expect anybody to know the 31 items that they can do. But how would you write this up? How would you write up that the landing light is inoperative? Or how would you, once you replaced it, what would you write in the logbook? So that falls under the 43, basically 5.57, 9, 11 is how that stuff is handled.
I may have mentioned it before, Phil, but one of the things that we have found and been asked questions about is returning aircraft to service using preventive maintenance when there's an AD due, and unless the AD explicitly says you can use preventative to do that work. You cannot. And the biggest culprit, of course, is owner operator doing oil changes on Lycoming engines that have 800304 revision 2 on them. So what they're doing is they're changing the oil and they're cutting open their oil filters and spreading the pleats apart and look for metal and all the stuff the AD says to do. But the problem is that the AD says it's an inspection item.
That's-
And inspection is maintenance, it's not preventive maintenance. So I'm actually writing an article. I've written the article. We're just getting ready to put out the 4th quarter of the maintenance newsletter, and I address preventive maintenance in that. Also talking about STC installed external devices. So if you have an STC installed internal or external or internal device that is removable but has to have hand tools, that can't be done in preventive maintenance either, unless the STC specifically says so. So it's important to look for that when you go and see if you've been returning 800304, signing off 800304 with preventive maintenance. If they have, the airplane's not airworthy.
Right. Yep.
Your question.
No, go ahead. Everyone understand what Ernie's talking about? There's things that are listed in preventive maintenance, but in the case of things like that oil filter and that AD checking for metal contaminants and stuff, has to be done by an A&P. So just got to be very careful on what it is you're actually doing. If you got the ADs, sometimes there are ADs that apply to things that are in preventive maintenance and are going to require an A&P to sign off.
All right, there are ADs out there that do allow preventive maintenance to be done to satisfy the daily requirements of the AD. For instance, there's a helicopter check. There's a check on helicopters you have to do, and the pilot has to do that every time before he takes off. So they wrote it right into the airworthiness directive that the owner operator may return do this. I don't think they call it inspection. They call it something else, using preventive maintenance, and it's so specifies you can. But if it doesn't specify you can, and it's a play on words here, whether it says inspection or clean. See, under preventive maintenance rules, you can clean an oil screen and you can replace an oil filter, but you can't inspect.
Mhm.
What's the AD number on that one you're talking about?
800304, revision 2.
Which engine does that apply to, Ernie?
Lycoming 320s, 360s, I think 520s. It's the adding to loop. Actually the AD actually entails a lot of work initially, but the big thing is that you have to change the oil every 50 hours or add Lycoming lubricant. So there's an alternate means of compliance where you can now use all these different lists of ashes dispersant oils. But again, they have to be changed, and then you don't have to add the additive, but that oils have to be changed every 50 hours or the additive has to be added. And that's all to keep to prevent galling and carbon buildup in your valves.
Mhm.
Hey, Ernie, this is Ben.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, let's just make it real simple, because if the AD will have a line item in it that says a pilot may do. If it does not say a pilot may do, you can't do.
Absolutely.
And just it is really that simple. So there's the Bendix mag switch on the older 172, 76, something, whatever AD.
Yeah.
It has a line item that says a pilot may do that, which is just simply a hot mag check. The bigger question, or the bigger thing is with airworthiness directives that I wanted to get my 2 cents on. Airworthiness directives as well as aircraft maintenance. A pilot can do aircraft maintenance. If he does aircraft maintenance, he must have a list of items and what a valid logbook entry is. And that valid logbook entry items are no different if a pilot does it or an A&P does it. Time and service, date, description of work, signature, and certificate number. And the ADs are, and ADs, each individual AD is an FAR. It is a line item, it's just numeralized differently than FAR 91213. It is the FAR number is the AD number. And that's why when you look at a particular at a AD, you must read the fine print. And I'm sitting here now with Jacob Hansen, we're going through his AD list. And that's where a good IA is worth his weight in properly documenting all of that, such that the pilot can make an easy deal. That's where I see pilots in the industry having the most problems, is understanding airworthiness directives, not only the text of them, but what they are. They're not just a recall like an automotive. It is a regulation, and we got to read each regulation. And if you don't know, go find somebody that does. Thank you.
One other thing too, in 91, which is the operator's regulation, it says that the record must contain in 91-417, but I would ignore that and go to 43-9 because 417 leaves out one critical step. So in 417, it says description of the work or reference to data completion of the work performed, and the signature and certificate number of the person approving the aircraft for return to service. If you go to 43 also says the name of the person performing the work, if other than the person specified in paragraph A4. And when it says that you have to sign it, it also says that you have to use your certificate and kind of certificate held by the person approving the work. So reference 43-9 rather than 91-417 when you're looking for the content of maintenance record entry.
Definitely. And adding to that, you see part 39 listed in the reference section of airworthiness. And I know that most people don't even know what part 39 is, but that is the regulation that Ben's referring to regarding ADs. And they fall under part 39. There's only about 17 of them, so it's not that many. But it, once again, would be a good idea for both the examiners and those out there doing the training for our customers out there to make sure that people are familiar with what it really is, instead of the comment, you know, it's like a recall on a car, or the other things that Ben was referring to. There's a lot more to it, and especially in regards to who can do it and what type of individuals, how they have to sign things off and check all this stuff. So throw in that part 39 stuff in the training for those of you out there that are training the pilots for us, to actually take a look at that, and I'll tell you how that process works. It's not that long, but it does give you a lot of information about the regulations regarding ADs, which I know that aren't really taught real well, other than telling us it's like a recall on a car and giving us the different types. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, so with the part 39, it's the smallest regulation, but it's the largest regulation. It's the smallest of the regulation because it reads, it's only 1 page long. Yeah. It is not a maintenance. It is not a maintenance regulation. It is a pilot regulation. It is an operator. No person may operate. When you see operate, that means pilot. You're a crane operator, the guy that's driving it, the guy who has the final authority that turns it into a museum piece to a piece of an airplane. All airworthiness directives are an amendment to part 39. And that's why it's the largest, because every single airworthiness directive on Boeing's, Airbus, Piper Cubs are part of part 39. It's an addendum to, but yes, please read part 39. It's real simple and easy to go through, and that shows you the regulatory basis for that, why it becomes regulatory on airworthiness directives. That's where a lot of guys get tagged on maintenance records, are going to end up with enforcement action, is not so much annual inspection, but airworthiness directives. So yes, please, you're right, Phil. Read part 39. It's real short and sweet.
Thanks, Ben. And nice goatee.
Thank you.
Any other comments regarding from anyone in the group there regarding what we just chatted about part 43 and part 39? I know that they're not looked at that much. They actually said they are listed as references in the ACS and the CFI PTS portion. It'd be great to spend a little bit more time on those things and exactly how they're regulated, what they mean, and how you comply with those, and regarding the documentation of compliance with those. Any other questions regarding that? Nope. Okay. So this one's popped up recently in the past month or two. There's I don't have all the individuals on here that well, Michael, are you on? Michael Phillips? I guess not. Some of the DPs are getting questions about using for the cross-country time requirements, using time from the previous training. Now, I don't have the exact examples, but some of them are wanting to use the long instrument, the instrument cross-country for the commercial cross-country. And when you read the regulations, they do differentiate between those. The only thing you can really use from the instrument rating, we discussed this a couple months ago, for the commercial rating was that 10 hours of instrument time required for the commercial rating, as long as it was documented in the applicant's logbook and the student's logbook as complying with 6165 and 129 B2 or something like that, the aeronautical experience for the applicant. But we're also starting to come up with some creative legs on distances from the start to finish on some of these. And just remember that people keep memorizing numbers and they forget the adjectives like more than, less than, at or above, at or below. It's more than 50 nautical miles when that airplane leaves its original point of departure. Once you hit that more than 50 nautical miles, you basically go anywhere you want, even start coming back home, and it counts as cross country. The other one is, now give me a second here. I just lost my train of thought. Oh, a go-around was commenced at one of the airports, and the instructor and the applicant were under the understanding that that counted. But remember, it has to be a landing. So the go-around, that airplane did not touch down, has to be a landing at that point. Just make sure that everybody understands that just because they went there and went around, it doesn't count as that one of those landings. Does anybody have any questions or examples of some of the things they've run across regarding that cross countries?
I'll share one, Phil, and Mike is listening. He says, sorry, Phil, no microphone. So we can say whatever we want about him. He can't really.
No, but he can still hear us. That's the problem.
He can. So unfortunately, I had to not begin a test recently. It was a private pilot, Part 61 applicant. And when I was checking over his records and looked at the cross-country flights for his solos, he actually did 2 solos that both met the requirement of going in a triangle more than 150 miles, except that on both occasions, he actually wrote down in his logbook that he did a touch and go at one of the airports. And there was nothing I could do about it, because when you read Part 61, it clearly says to a full stop. And I don't know why that's important to the FAA, but they didn't ask my opinion when they wrote it, and that's what it says, and that's what we have to follow. And so for those of the instructors that are watching this, not only make sure that your applicants, that your students do a full stop landing, either a full stop taxi back or a stop and go at each airport on that cross country, but just have them write it in the remarks, because part 61 specifically says full stop. Just write that in the logbook. You know, I went to these airports, full stop landing at each airport, just something so that we can look at it and say, yep, that's what I need to see. Most of the time what I see is they don't say anything. And I'll just ask the applicant, hey, you did a full stop at each airport, right? And like, yeah. Like, okay, well, you know, maybe we'll go ahead and squeeze that in the remarks, you know, just so it's documented. But the fact that he had already written touch and go before I even got there that day, there was nothing I could do. It was really unfortunate. He had to, of course, go do a whole nother flight.
Mhm. And thanks for that, Jim. One of the other things that we can do, normally it's not an issue with the schools, the 141 schools and stuff, because they pretty much have canned cross countries for their programs, through their TCOs. So it tends to be more prevalent among the freelance individuals. Maybe they actually did a cross country a certain way and it did get past the powers that be and thought that was okay. So we have to be careful of that stuff. A few years into this, I started asking for pictures once the cell phone program came out, for pictures of the cross country, the qualifying cross countries for their rating, so that I could do a couple things before. Number one, I had a date when they did it, so I could look right away in the book and find it. Also, I was able to look at the mileage on the cross country. And remember, we're pretty much familiar with what was going on around here, but we do occasionally get people that did do their cross country training and some of their training at a school out of the area, maybe back east or whatever, and we're not real familiar with the airport. So that would help also for us to know that we do have a qualifying cross country. And it saves us showing up and not being able to run a check ride, but more importantly, it lets them know that it doesn't meet the requirements. And now they have an opportunity before they show up to take care of that. But the SA has to be careful what they write in the books. So thanks for that, Jim. Any other input for cross-country issues that you've run across?
Hey, Phil, it's Josh.
Yes.
I just had recently a Part 61 applicant for a commercial single engine. And similar to Jim's story, it was in the logbook, the 2-hour day, 2-hour night cross country. I think it was the day, was logged as a solo cross country. No instructor endorsement, it was a solo operation. But it's part of the 20 hours of training for instruction received on the specific areas in 127.
Yes.
So it needed to have an instructor on board, and they did it as a solo.
Yes, thanks for that, Josh. That is another issue where now that they have I've already got their instrument rating and stuff, they will have a tendency to take someone with them and, split the time. So we've got to watch that. That's a good point, Josh, is make sure that they understand that is part of the dual that they're supposed to be getting out of that 20 hours, is that both the day one and the night one. Yeah, and not to be under the hood. I don't know if anybody's seen that one, but I have, when they got a little extra hood time out of it. So remember, the concept of the VFR cross countries is to do what? Navigate with pilotage, dead reckoning, and radio navigation. That's the whole idea behind that. Especially at nighttime, wearing the hood isn't going to do a whole lot of good. Thanks, Josh. Anything else regarding that one? Oh, okay. Okay, this is kind of a hard one to explain or to chat about, but I've had a couple examiners mention to me that they were told they couldn't go to a certain airport or conduct a maneuver in a certain manner or fail an engine in a certain manner. And Steve Brimmer, are you on?
Hi, Phil.
There you are. Yeah, did you want to take a minute to talk about your situation?
Well, one of the major schools, one of the largest schools in the country, apparently they have a former DPE who's a representative, and this person called me up. Well, actually sent me an email first, asked if he could speak with me. So I gave him a call, and he explained that he's a former DPE and he liaisons with examiners. And he said he also discusses inappropriate behavior by examiners. And he said that that was what I did, inappropriate behavior. It was because during a multi-engine commercial multi-add-on on the task where at altitude, they do have to fly with one engine inoperative. I failed in the Piper Seminole using the fuel selector, which is completely authorized. Absolutely nothing forbids it. Well, this guy says he was surprised that I said, yes, I did do that. And I do that quite often. Most examiners do. And he says, that's inappropriate behavior. He says, it's against school policy. And I told him, well, examiners are not employees of the school. I said that one of the reasons behind the examiner program is to have a disconnect so that there's no undue influence, employee, manager influence like that. So I said, as long as this maneuver is authorized, we can do it. And he kept on trying to say, no, you can't. And it just went back and forth. And I basically politely told him to get lost. But first of all, this guy using that term inappropriate behavior in describing this, and this guy has no authority. He's not some FAA individual. He's just a company representative. So I explained to him, we cannot tailor the way we conduct some of these maneuvers to meet the desires of the schools, because that would just be giving them preferential treatment. Say this school, we do it this way, or we don't do something. And then, but the other school we do. So for the other school, they do have to be prepared for that, but their school, they don't. So this guy just did not get it. I ought to throw him underneath the bus, but I did file a complaint with the FSDO. And hopefully they did reach out to whoever they reach out to. But the bottom line is we have to treat everyone the same. If a maneuver is authorized, it can be done. No school gets special treatment. And we cannot be influenced by these schools to curtail what we are authorized to do. That defeats obviously what we have to accomplish. So I'm very adamant that we cannot bow down to these schools. Okay, what's the downside of that? That school may no longer decide to use that examiner. Too bad, use other examiners. But that leads back to that whole deal about schools complaining they don't have enough examiners. Well, a lot of schools are not using certain examiners and using only a few limited number. So it all ends up being a big mess. Bottom line, we cannot be influenced by these schools. If it's authorized, we can do it. If they don't want us to do it, well, too bad. They are freely, it's completely up to them if they decide not to use an examiner, because an examiner will not bow down to them. And that's all about what I have to say.
All right, thanks. Does anyone else run into any issues like that?
Just the same conversation with the same guy, but not for that reason.
Okay. And once again, this isn't to, we have to be, we're trying to make this as seamless as possible for these individuals, but there's some things that we have to do what we have to do. And I just recommend it in a tactful way as much as you can. Explain to them that this is how I will conduct the different portions of the check, right? Or I mean, I've had them tell me I can't go into a certain airport, and it's a legitimate public use airport, paved and so on and so forth. And I get the concept of not going into unpaved strips and so on and so forth. That goes without saying. But just remember, we have to do what we think we need to do, what we are supposed to be doing for the FAA and not the school. I get that they're trying to eliminate as much liability as possible. But the whole idea behind this business is there is a safety factor and liability involved in it. And we're trying to mitigate as much of that as possible while we're evaluating these individuals. Did have one examiner tell me that his school said they would refuse to ever have a check ride videotaped or zoomed or whatever. Unfortunately, that's not going to work out too well when that examiner's up for a surveillance. So just best we can do to try to smooth things over, but we do have to follow what we have on there, and it may not be what they're looking for in regards to a safety or liability issue, but the reality is if we're following the ACSs, we're not really creating anything that should be a problem. So we're there also to make sure nothing bad happens during the check ride anyway. Any other comments regarding that?
Hey, Phil, this is
Yes.
Brian Baker.
Hey,
I'm not a
Brian.
DPE, but it seems to me with as much scrutiny as is being directed at DPEs over the last couple of years on some things, is that a DPE would be really hard pressed to bow to the wishes of a flight school or a CFI or something like that in terms of how a check ride would be conducted. I mean, that just setting yourself up for having the FAA come back on you at some point with an applicant if something happens.
Most definitely, and all it does is make it harder for the next person to come along. So if you agree to their wishes and the next guy or girl wants to do it according to their plan of action, which is perfectly safe, legal, it just makes it harder on the next DPE to do that. But you're right, it's a fine line we have to walk sometimes, but the DPEs have a job to do. You got to do the best you can to maintain your integrity and accomplish the job at hand, obviously with safety in mind, which doesn't seem to be an issue. The DPEs that we have here are pretty well experienced and don't seem to run into any of those problems. Thanks for that, Brian. Any other comments?
Yeah, Phil, this is Craig, just one.
Yeah.
My advice to anybody, if you feel that you've been inappropriately pressured, just talk to your managing specialist.
Most definitely. The best thing to do. See what I have here. Okay, we just let, yeah, thanks for that comment, Rich. For those that haven't seen it, schools can and always have cherry-picked examiners up until the initial flight instructor level. And of course, they actually have that opportunity to do that now. And before that, there's only a handful of us that did CFI, so you're kind of limited as to who was going to do your CFI. But now with the barriers down, you could get a myriad of people to do the CFI check rides. Thanks for that, Rich. This came up. Don't really have an answer for it, but Craig, do you remember this discussion with Terry regarding logging a multi-engine time before you're even rated in the airplane?
Oh, wow. I must go back away.
Yeah. What it was is, and Terry's wasn't able to make it today, and I wanted Terry to be here to explain this, but apparently there's a thought process that an individual in training in the multi-engine airplane can log PIC time while they're in training. My personal interpretation is no. That's a different, they haven't received that class rating yet. But this is now starting to pop up in the past couple months. And I don't know if anyone else has run across this, but Craig, do you have a comment regarding that? Or is that just something we're going to look at down the road?
Yeah, I'm straining my memory banks on this, but I know, and this may not be part of the conversation this came from, but you can find legal interpretations where there's a difference between acting as PIC and being PIC. But I'm not sure if it came out of this or not. So I gotta take the fifth for now.
Yeah,
Well,
logging, it's acting and logging. And Phil, I'd love to see what regulation these people are trying to reference with this, because all of the ones that I can think of, it's very black and white. So, I mean, you know, the whole thing about sole manipulated controls in an aircraft in which you are rated, and the
Yes.
FAA has given very clear definition on what it means to be rated in an aircraft. It's category, class, and type if a type is required. So that leaves room for things like high performance or complex endorsement, tailwheel endorsement. Those things are not part of being rated in an airplane. But multi-engine, like you just said, category and class.
Mhm.
So,
Well, I agree that you couldn't log that time, but once again, this popped up a few months ago, and I just wanted to get a feeler out there for that. It is just like you say, Jim, acting as pilot in command. We know about the 10 hours when people were getting their commercial ratings and Seminoles before they got a single engine rating. They had to have their 10 hours of.
yeah, but there's a regulation that addresses what is it?
Exactly.
Performing duties of pilot in command. There's a whole regulation that covers that.
That's correct. I agree with you. So I don't know why this has popped up, but apparently it's, I guess for lack of a better word, kind of being encouraged at a few places to be able to log that time. And that's not what I believe should be happening right here, because it's pretty distinctive between the two of them. But, you know, in our travels out there, if we have an opportunity to educate, you know, some individuals on this concept. I know, you know, it costs a lot of money to do all this, and everybody's trying to do what they can to get that PIC time, but we do have to stick with the regs and try not to create some obscure interpretations, or God forbid something should happen and that individual is found when they go through his logbooks or her logbooks that there was some, you know, lack of correct logging of their aircraft time, which could cause obviously some FAA issues as well as insurance issues.
You know, Phil, I appreciate you bringing it up, because we all do need to keep our eyes open. At the risk of sounding political, I think this is a small example of what we see in our culture these days, where it seems to be if you get enough people to say something or believe something, then all of a sudden that makes it true.
Mhm.
And we as the gatekeepers need to make sure that we always point back to the regulation.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I wish that even, you know, we mentioned before how we would probably write a regulation and in regards to actually, you know, landing somewhere, touch and goes don't count, stop, you know, a touch and go to count, go arounds don't count. But unfortunately, some of the regulations haven't been touched in a long time. And there's still some obscurity with a lot of them, but I agree with you on that. Any other comments on this? Just what we're talking about is just educating the troops out there about what they can log and what they can't log for PIC time. Okay, point of contact reports. So Jim, you're online. Do you have anything in your neck of the woods?
Just a couple things. I think everyone knows that United Airlines purchased West Wind School of Aeronautics actually right before the pandemic started. So that's old news. What some of you may not know is they've decided to move the operation to Goodyear. So apparently United Airlines has acquired assets from what used to be Lufthansa Flight Training. I don't know all the details of that. I don't really any of the details, other than I heard that they're excited about the dorms that are available there at Goodyear and the Cirrus aircraft. So the United Airlines program, I think it's called Aviate, will be operating down there with whatever remains of what used to be West Wind School of Aeronautics, which doesn't seem to be much. The operation at Glendale, I'm sorry, the operation at Deer Valley will continue probably through the end of this year. They still haven't made all the decisions about how much will happen, you know, whether it's a Part 61, Part 141 division, or, you know, custom students versus professional or anything like that. But they're going to be running both operations for some time. We don't know exactly how long. And rumors are that Cutter Aviation, that owns the buildings at Deer Valley, is excited to have more corporate aircraft. So that's from a recent meeting that I heard of it with the airport manager talking about what they want to do with the physical space. So some changes there. Really, that just leaves AeroGuard as, once all the dust settles, AeroGuard will be the only flight school at Deer Valley. And the only other news, Deer Valley Tower is doing tours on a limited basis. I actually took a couple small groups through on Monday, and it was great to get back up there. Basically, groups of 4 during normal business hours when a supervisor can escort, and US citizens, masks are required, but you can call and schedule and do tours again. So that's good. That's all I got.
Okay. Let's see, Brian.
Nothing that I know of to report at Falcon. Everything seems to be going smooth. I'm interested to see when the hangars on the north side start being used with all the corporate aircraft, and I believe CAU is going to move their operations over there as well. So that'll be interesting here in the next few months. But as of right now, everything seems to be pretty status quo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Brian, there is a runway closure coming up. Have you heard about that?
I have not. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, the south runway is going to get closed. It's the first week or the first 2 weeks of November.
Appreciate that.
I see that we have James here from CAU. You want to chime in, James? Give us an update. How are things? How was your first summer in Phoenix?
It was a hot one, but appreciate being here. Definitely love that you guys have these and open it up to us. On the AFTW meeting, I had a couple of my colleagues in California listening because I just love what you guys are doing with the whole program over there. But as far as the closure of the runway over here at Falcon, I have it written down as October 18th to the 29th. So I don't know if I have that wrong or not, but that's what I had reported earlier. And yeah, just happy to be here and look forward to having a couple check rides coming up the next couple months. Hopefully work with Brian with that.
Thanks, guys.
And yeah, we will be moving up to the north hangars as soon as those open up. You know how construction goes. I keep saying next month. So
yeah. Thanks. Bill Scott, are you on? And Kim from Tucson? Nope, I've got some others here from that were emailed into me here. This is from Jared. And his comment was he continues to see many applicants struggling to do effective VFR nav logs. Many are combining for-flight data with paper sections and doubly applying variation and deviation. Overall, how are people seeing the nav log concept work, whether they're paper or the electronic? Have there been any issues with that? I know what he's referring to there is they're not, the reason this happens is because they don't understand what for-flight is doing in the background to come up with the mag course heading and ground speed and so on and so forth. So I just had one the other day that first time we went through each line in his nav log and for-flight and was enlightened in what was actually going on in the background there because no one had ever shown it to him. But he was basically just copying the data onto a nav log, not realizing that he did need to, that the variation was already put in there. But how's that been going for those of you out there with from the DPE group on the nav logs? No issues?
I can tell you, it just most of the ones I see, they do a really good job of actually calculating things by hand and still using an E6B. Just the schools that I do most of my tests at require and encourage that. And then they'll kind of back it up with Garmin Pilot or for-flight. I did have one that was exactly what you're saying, where they basically mapped it out on for-flight and then they just tap on the leg. And, you know, it said it was a course of 258 and they write that down on their paper under true course when right on for-flight, it says 258M.
Right.
And so they're basically doing double variation correction, but I've really only seen that once.
Okay.
So, but it's something to watch for sure.
Yeah. And just cover what I covered a few months back is when I did use ForeFlight, I just asked them to tell me how those numbers were generated. They didn't physically have to do the math. I just would like for them to know how, you know, going from true course to wind correction to true heading, and then variation started where they got to see the mag heading, and then go on from there. So that's all I ever asked was, how did it come up with that number? I didn't need to know the exact numbers. Okay, Todd up in Prescott says he had some, I guess, some IACRA issues. I'll bring these up here in case y'all had something else. But as you see, their instructor signature was there in the opening and signing phase, but in the closing out, last signature from DP, instructor signature disappeared. Has anyone seen that? No, okay. Aircraft used for the test was there on page 1 of the 8710, but on page 2, where aircraft used is auto-populated. There's no aircraft, i.e. aircraft did not auto-populate to page 2. Has anybody seen that? Nope, okay. Maybe it's that thin air up there in Preston. Not sure there's any other ways to fix these two. They're just anomalies. DPE gets penalty for oh, he's just referring to those last two here. At this point, you just have to submit a correction via IACRA electronically, so it's returned. One of the other things that someone wanted me to bring up was, are you guys still using C-172, C-172-172, or are you actually putting in C-172S or R or M? What's been the consensus?
I've settled on doing C1 CE 172-172, so it covers all 172s, and that makes it simpler for the applicant when they're figuring out their numbers. If they flew mostly in S's, but sometimes in R models, it doesn't matter. It's all 172. So the important thing for anyone that's not familiar with this discussion is that whatever we put in DMS matches what's in IACRA when we close out and sign at the end of the test. If those are different, our managing specialist gets an email, and that is very irritating. So make sure they match.
So what you, since I'm not that familiar with it, what you have to do is when you do show up for the check ride, you have to change the DMS to reflect the actual model of airplane you're flying.
Well, yeah, usually so the way I've decided to do it is I'll show up to the test, and on the application, it'll say 172S. And I already put in DMS a few days before the 172-172. So already I'm like, all right, they don't match. I could do nothing at that point, finish the test, and remember to change it before I sign the application. On that same screen where you put in the airport and the flight time and the ground time and all that stuff, you can change it right there and everything will be fine. The managing specialist will not get an email. I've decided that to be safe, because it's easy to forget in that moment, that I will kindly ask the applicant to log in and change their application. We don't change their application, but and if you're using Chrome, little technical tip for you if you guys don't know, open an incognito window by doing Control-Shift-N as in November, opens up an incognito window so that you can, I and the applicant can both be logged into IACRA on the same computer at the same time. So they log in once, update their application with 172-172, resubmit it, and then I can do what I need to do on IACRA, and they're still logged in when it's time for them to sign it. So it really doesn't take any extra time using an incognito window like that. Just a tip.
Okay. Anyone else have any more comments regarding that? Or any suggestions? Nope. Okay. Let's see here. Todd's last thing here, still having issues at Prescott with applicants on check rides, not being able to complete a check ride due to no priority in our overloaded airport system. So what they've asked for is that the DPE or have the applicant let them know that they are on a check ride, and hopefully that'll take care of that. Once again, I don't have any more solid information on AFM POH application dates. As you try and get some more information on that, I'll publish that. Systems and equipment malfunctions, we're still looking at tendency to be just testing on 2 or 3 malfunctions. Could tend to broaden our scope on some of that. And once again, there's that nice little form right out of the airplane flying handbook to give you some various equipment malfunctions, assuming that they apply to that aircraft. Data plates, still have people not realizing that they have to have a data plate on board the airplane is one of the required documents. So that's someone asked me to put that slide back up again with the actual regulations on that. Okay. Guys, I need to get somebody at the front door for just a second. Just stand by.
Hey, Jim, this is Craig. Why don't you mention that ECFR thing and maybe we could look at it later, but you could at least mention it now.
Okay. Yeah, if you think that was useful. So I don't know exactly when this happened, but sometime in the last couple of days, ecfr.gov had a major facelift. And that's, of course, the electronic Code of Federal Regulations. Go play with it. I spent some time today kind of going through and figuring out some of the things. Just to tell you what to look for, you can create an account, you can use your email address and create a password, and they have some kind of subscription service that apparently will send updates. You can subscribe to certain regulations. There's some really cool features for going back in time and comparing how regulations have changed. And they've got some cool identing and formatting that makes it easy to read the regs and to copy links to share them. So Phil, Craig just asked me to mention something I mentioned at the FTW meeting about ecfr.gov got an update. So check it out when you get a chance.
Got it. Thanks. Anyone have any questions on the data plate concept? Once again, it should be in that same requirement for documents on board the aircraft. Okay, let's see. Anyone have any issues or problems they want to discuss other than what we talked about so far? Anything from a procedure standpoint?
I did have a quick question for you. I'm not a DPE. I'm a double I, and I'm working with a client in a new airplane on his instrument rating. He's got an Aspen and a G5 and a whole bunch of other stuff in there. And I'm looking for some guidance on what exactly DPEs will be looking for when it comes to partial panel in that airplane. Is there some document that explains how to do that?
I have an Aspen on my 182. And I don't know of a document on that, but has anyone online here done an instrument in an Aspen equipped airplane?
I have. So my thoughts on that, Mike, and thanks for being here, Mike. We appreciate you both here and at the FTW meeting. So first of all, I also still call it partial panel, but since we're getting technical, what the book actually says, the ACS, is loss of primary flight display. So my advice, and this is a great example of something that the applicant should bring up at the beginning of the check ride, or you as the instructor should have this phone call several days or weeks before the check ride and talk to your particular examiner about it. But based on my interpretation of what the ACS says, we are to come up with a realistic scenario. So look at that particular aircraft, look at how the electrical system is set up, look at how the instruments are set up, and the examiner should know enough about the Aspen, the Garmin, whatever it is, whether they have their own internal backup batteries, and get enough information from the aircraft owner to give realistic scenarios that, okay, if you have an alternator failure and it's thick IMC for the next hour, what's eventually going to happen? What's going to die first? and kind of get through some of the technical stuff, but then in the air to fly an approach based on a realistic scenario with a loss of primary flight display. A lot of these modern cockpits with all the backups, what you and I did as partial panel years ago is not the same anymore. You just, oh, here's my primary flight display. It stopped working. Okay, I'll fly the approach using this one. That meets the requirements of the ACS. But my biggest suggestion there, just to reiterate, is make it a realistic scenario for that aircraft.
So Mike, on that airplane, like my 182 has a backup, a second radio with its own indicator. Okay, it's got its own CDI in it. Obviously, I have a magnetic compass to back up the HSI and an attitude indicator. Okay, and I still have the ball and the turn coordinator. So I have a 6-pack without the vertical speed in it, and the attitude indicator in the glass part. So I have all the backups. So what I did when I was training people in how to do that stuff in an Aspen airplane when I first got it was they simply, I covered up the Aspen two indicators. At this airplane, I only have the one. I don't have the 3 pairs that you could possibly have. So they used the backup radio for the ILS localizer, VOR, whatever it was we were doing. The GPS obviously was just hooked up to the number 1, so a GPS approach couldn't be done. And they had an airspeed indicator, an attitude indicator, and a ball, so an altimeter, of course, and then the compass. So I could do everything I needed to do and trained it that way. Once again, it'd be a good idea for. I don't know that Aspen has a program like Garmin does. Of course, they've got an instructor/examiner profile for how to, deal with the different failures for check rides, but I've not seen anything by Aspen. So might actually be something Jim and I can work on somewhere down the road. I've been asked this question before and maybe come up with just some sort of a template on what the options are. Because once again, it depends on how many screens do they have. Because if you got 2 of them, you can simply move everything over to the other screen, and you like the Garmin 1000, and then you complied with the ACS.
Yeah, and he's got a G5 for his standby attitude, so no vacuum system in the airplane. He's got a GTN 750, 650. It's a very well equipped airplane, and so I've asked a couple local DPEs. I haven't heard from anybody yet, but I was looking for some sort of official guidance on how to do that. But Jim, I appreciate what you say about loss of primary flight instruments. That's a great place to start. And I'm not into pulling circuit breakers, but I can turn the brightness down on it, I think, or I can cover it with a Post-it note or something. If that would satisfy the requirement, just have them fly it with the G5 as a standby.
Sure, that works just fine. And it started out as the vacuum system failure, where the DG and the attitude indicator. Then it became the loss of a partial panel, and then it became a loss of primary flight instruments. So it kind of went through a transition from what I learned in the 70s, what the title was of that program. But as the systems change, the titles seem to change a little bit too. But that should work. Jim, you got anything else for him?
Real quick, thank you. I think it's also important. So everything we just talked about is check ride requirements. As an instructor, and for any other instructors that are watching this, it's also important to differentiate between skill building and real life scenarios. The real life scenarios is where we're supposed to operate during a practical test. There's still other things that I would consider skill building that you should do that entails covering up more instruments, and it's not even a realistic scenario for that aircraft anymore, but you need to develop the skill of just flying with a old traditional turn coordinator and a compass. And going along with that is to emphasize to your applicant that from the examiner's point of view, this is not just a practical test to fly that airplane in the IFR system. As examiners, we're responsible to make sure this person is well-rounded and qualified to go rent any aircraft that they're qualified in, within reason. Of course, getting aircraft checkout would be expected. But for example, there's people, these new Archers that AeroGuard have, they don't even, the NXI G1000 doesn't even have a magnetic compass. Their standby is the Aspen. There's no magnetic compass anywhere in that cockpit, but I still go over magnetic compass errors and, undershoot, overshoot, all that kind of stuff during the ground. And no one has a problem with it. And they haven't questioned me, but if they ever did, I would simply say, this isn't just a check ride to fly this airplane. You need to know, and it's in the ACS, it's fair game to ask about it. So just keep that in mind as you're going through, some things could still come up on the oral.
Yeah, and that's the way I've approached it too. I fly a 787 at work, and it's still got a magnetic compass in it, but the loss of primary is a non-event because there's so many backups. Yeah. But I did the complex endorsement with them a couple of months ago, and this is an electro-hydraulic landing gear system, but this complex endorsement legally allows you to fly anything with retractable gear, lots of other systems. So here's how you find out how this system works if you ever find yourself in something else.
Right. There's so many variations on the landing gear. And then the other thing is that if it was up to me, which it's not, and I'm sure the EAA and AOPA are glad it's not up to me, I would have two separate instrument ratings. I would have instrument airplane basic and instrument airplane EFIS. You got an instrument rating in one of those, and then you got another type of 6131 endorsement, for the other type of aircraft. Because I think about somebody that learns in a steam gauge 172, but has the funds to go out and buy a used 172 with a Garmin 1000 in it, and vice versa. That kind of stuff can keep you awake at nighttime. But the rating says instrument airplane, unfortunately. But if we were a little bit smarter with this, then we'd have a differentiation. What airplane did you take the test in? And then if you want to fly something else, go find an instructor and get another form of a 6131 endorsement.
It's a little like when I got my multi-engine rating, that there was no instrument portion of it, and now there is.
Oh, yeah.
That's another example of that.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, when I did mine, I did a Comanche. When we lost an engine, we lost the engine.
Where'd you put it?
What's that?
Where did you put it?
Yeah. Well, when they pulled the engine back on takeoff, a couple 100 feet in the air in a twin Comanche of all airplanes, that was done. Yeah. But that's what you did. There was you can't do anything below 500 feet. You'll use the throttle for this and the fixture for that. That's just what we did. When I landed, with an engine out, I landed with an engine out, but that's the way it was back then. Okay. Any other comments regarding that? Thanks, Mike. Anything under technical? So airspace, airports, FAA, pubs. Nothing. Okay. Anything in a professional level? Anything best practices, plan of action, Paul's 61 versus 141. Any feedback from schools and instructors that you're getting, that the DPs are getting? I'm going to have the floor open here in a minute for the guests. Nothing there. Okay. And we don't have any mentoring going on right now because of that. Okay. Any questions from the DPEs? Stuff that we haven't covered or that you want to cover? Nope. Okay, committee reports. We don't have anything in administration, communication, membership, nothing there. And alliances, Jim, you covered everything you want to cover with the AFTW?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Craig, anything from FAST?
Not at this time, Phil. Thank you.
All right. Okay, we don't have any programs going on right now. When does the Flight Instructor of the Year program start getting booted up? Anybody know? Oh, okay.
Are you talking about the award?
Yes.
Oh, you can submit anytime up to the 30th of November.
30th of November. Okay. That's what I was looking for, Ernie. Thanks. Okay. Any, well, see, we're pretty much covered that. Anything from our FSDO reps? Nothing? Okay. And guests. Okay. Any comments from the guests or questions from any of our guests? All right. Okay, the next meeting will be October 12th, 2021, next month, second Tuesday of the month. And once again, I request any input that any individuals have regarding topics to be covered in these meetings. You guys are out there doing this more so than I am. I get a few phone calls once in a while, but you all know more what's going on. And that includes the guests as well. Any of the instructors, schools that we have on the list or that you hear from someone else. I appreciate any input that you want to give. And if you want questions brought up that are de-identified, that's not a problem either. If you just want me to bring something up or a topic up that's de-identified, that's fine too. No issue there. Okay, guys, thanks for your attendance today. And if there's nothing else, I'll see you all in a month.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Great job.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Phil.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought somebody said something, but the thanks got cut out. You bet. Thanks, guys and women.